On the gun deck of a pirate sloop, a gun crew loads its cannon, with two half balls of iron joined by a short length of chain. They run the gun out and aim high, above the enemy's deck, at the rope and canvas holding her masts up. A Navy gunner might be trying to punch through that hull at the waterline and drown her. These men are doing the opposite on purpose, because a sunken ship is worth nothing to the men who chased her down. They didn't come to destroy her. They came to take her whole. But this story doesn't begin with the boarding. It begins with a problem that faced every pirate the second a sail appeared on the horizon. He had found a ship worth taking. Now he had to take it without wrecking the very thing that made it worth taking. Think about what a loaded merchant ship actually was. It was a floating warehouse. Sugar, tobacco, bolts of cloth, wine, indigo, chests of coin, all of it packed into a wooden hull. And that hull was fragile in one specific way. A single well-aimed cannonball at the waterline could open it to the sea, and once the water started coming in, there was no closing it again. A Navy captain in a real fleet battle often wanted exactly that. Hold the enemy low, let the ocean finish the job, and count it a win when she rolled under. For a pirate, that same lucky shot was a catastrophe. Drown the ship, and you drown the cargo, the coin, and quite often the finest vessel you were ever going to get your hands on. So the popular picture gets the whole thing backwards. The one from every film, where pirates trade rolling broadsides and blast a prize into a raft of floating splinters. According to Bennerson Little, a former Navy SEAL who became the leading modern historian of pirate tactics, the Sea Rover's real aim was almost always the reverse. He wanted the target left standing. His cannon fire went at the masts, the rigging, and the sails, and it stayed well clear of the hull. Slow her down, cut off her escape, then come alongside and take her by hand. If you like your history with the legends stress-tested against what the record actually proves, take a second and subscribe. That's the whole job here on Powder Monkeys. Now, back to that problem on the horizon, because the way pirates solved it turned a raid into a piece of cold engineering. Start with why capturing a ship at sea is so hard in the first place. You're not storming a building that stays put. You're chasing a target that is itself a moving machine, and that machine has one great defense. It can run. As long as a merchant ship can catch the wind and steer, she has a chance of reaching a friendly port, or a patrolling warship, or simply outlasting the daylight and slipping away in the dark. A pirate could have twice the men and heavier guns, and still watch his prize shrink over the horizon if she kept her speed and her nerve. And the sea itself is never neutral. Wind direction decides who can catch whom, and a shift in the weather can hand the advantage to either ship inside a few minutes. A rising swell turns gunnery into a guessing game and boarding into a gamble. The pirate isn't only solving for the enemy crew, he's solving for the wind, the water, and the daylight left, all at once, against a target that gets a vote in every one of them. It helped that most merchant ships were never built to fight. They were built to carry cargo cheaply, with as few hands as an owner could get away with, because every extra sailor was a wage to pay and a mouth to feed. A pirate crew came the other way around, packed with fighting men and hungry for a prize. So the contest was rarely even. But an outgunned, undermanned merchantman could still cost a pirate his prize in the worst way imaginable, by going to the bottom, and that was the single outcome the entire attack was built to prevent. So the whole attack has a first objective, and it has nothing to do with killing the crew or holding the hull. The first objective is mobility. Take away a ship's ability to run and to steer, and you've turned a fast, slippery target into a heavy wooden box sitting dead in the water. Everything after that, the closing, the grappling, the rush across the deck, only becomes possible once that box is stopped. And the trick, the whole reason this takes engineering instead of brute force, is that you have to freeze her without wounding her. To understand how, you have to understand what actually moves a sailing ship, because that's what the pirates were aiming at. A ship's power lives in two systems of rope. There's the standing rigging, the thick tarred lines that hold the masts upright against the pull of the wind. And there's the running rigging, the working lines the crew hauls every hour to raise the sails, angle the yards, and trim the canvas to the wind. Together with the masts and the sails, sailors called all of it the top hamper. Cut into that web the right way and a ship doesn't sink. She just goes limp. The sails spill their wind, the yards swing loose, and a vessel that was driving hard through the swell a minute ago starts to wallow, slow, and drift. Here is where the hardware comes in, and it's stranger than the movies ever show you. To kill a ship's speed without touching her hull, pirates and navies alike reached for two specialized cannon rounds, bar shot and chain shot. Picture a normal cannonball, a solid iron sphere. Now cut it in half. Take those two half balls and join them. either with a rigid iron bar in the case of bar shot, or with a length of chain in the case of chain shot. The Museum of the American Revolution keeps real examples of both in its collection, and its description of them is blunt about the purpose. Solid round shot was used to pound through the heavy planks of a hull. Bar shot and chain shot were built to destroy rigging, masts, and sails. Same gun, same crew, completely different intent, decided entirely by which round the gun captain chose to ram down the barrel. Loading and firing one of these guns was heavy, practice labor. A crew of several men swabbed the barrel with a wet sponge to kill any smoldering embers, rammed home the powder charge and then the shot, hauled the heavy gun back out through its port on rope tackle, and stood well clear of the vicious recoil when it went off. Feeding them was the job of the ship's youngest hands, boys often no older than 12 or 13 who ran fresh powder up from the magazine to the guns through the smoke and the noise and the flying wood. The sailors had a name for those boys. They called them powder monkeys. There was a whole family of these purpose-built rounds, and each one was matched to a job. Round shot for the hull, when you wanted to punch through solid timber. Bar and chain for the rigging, when you wanted to cut a ship's legs out from under her. And for the crew themselves, there was grape shot and canister, clusters of small iron balls that spread like a giant shotgun blast and swept a deck from one end to the other. A gun captain who wanted a whole ship and a broken crew loaded the middle option for the masts and saved the man-killers for later. Up close, when the two ships had almost met, the reason lies in how these things fly. When a chain round leaves the muzzle, the two weights tumble apart and the chain snaps out to its full length between them. Some of these rounds carried as much as 6 feet of chain. So instead of a single compact ball punching one neat hole, you got a spinning, whirling scythe of iron sweeping a wide arc through the air. Fire that up into a mast full of rope and canvas, and it doesn't make a hole. It cuts. It slashes through the lines that hold a sail to its yard, tears long rents in the canvas itself, and if it catches a spar or a mast at the right angle, it can bring the whole thing crashing down onto the deck in a tangle of rope and splintered wood. Now, that tumbling motion came at a price, and it's a detail worth being honest about. A spinning bar or chain is far less accurate than a solid ball. It wobbles, it wanders offline, and it bleeds off energy fast. So, these rounds only worked at short range, which meant the attacker had to be close, dangerously close, before he could use them at all. You didn't fire this from across the water. You fired it in the last minutes before two ships met, when a miss was almost impossible, and the target filled the whole sky above your gun. And even then, cannon of this era were not precise instruments. Ball size varied, powder strength varied, both ships were rolling on a live sea, and gunners knew it. That's why, according to the World History Encyclopedia's survey of pirate weapons, captains usually held their fire until they were within 500 feet of a target, and often much closer, before letting a broadside go. Reaching up to clip a specific mast from a pitching deck, at that range, took a skilled gun crew, and no small amount of luck. And notice where all of it is aimed. Not level, at the crew or the cargo, but high, up into that top hamper, the whole tangle of masts, spars, sails, and standing rigging that turns wind into motion. This was doctrine, not improvisation. In the great naval wars of the Age of Sail, whole schools of gunnery were built around firing high to disable an enemy, rather than firing low to sink her. The French Navy in particular became known for it, deliberately shooting away an opponent's rigging to leave her crippled and adrift, then closing in on a ship that could no longer run or turn. This work could begin before the two ships were ever fully alongside. Many vessels mounted a gun or two right at the bow and the stern, called chase guns, that could be aimed forward or aft when the main broadside couldn't bear on the target. A pursuer would use his bow chasers to reach out at a fleeing ship's rigging, trying to wing a sail or clip a spar, and shave off just enough of her speed to catch her at all. It was slow, patient, long-range gunnery, all of it pointed at taking the target's legs without ever touching her body. Think about what that does to a vessel in the space of a few seconds. A merchantman under full sail is a structure of tension and balance. Dozens of ropes, each holding a load. Every sail trimmed to pull just so. Slash through the running, rigging, and the sails go slack and useless, flogging in the wind. Bring down a topmast or a heavy yard, and a third of her canvas collapses in a heap across the deck, maybe pinning men under it. In moments, a ship that was slicing through the water at speed is drifting sideways to the swell, unable to steer, unable to run. She hasn't sunk. She hasn't even been badly hurt below the rail. But she has stopped being a ship in any way that matters to her crew, and she has become a prize waiting to be collected. and none of this was clean, even aimed high. Sailors described bar and chain shot coming in with a low, tumbling buzz you could hear a heartbeat before it struck. When a mast or a heavy yard came crashing down, it fell on whoever was working beneath it, and the shattered wood threw splinters across the deck like shrapnel. Sparing the hull did nothing to protect the men. The crew and the rigging took the full weight of it, which is exactly why a target that could see this coming often chose to strike her colors before the guns ever spoke. That's the logic of the whole approach in a single line. Splinter the hull, and you sink your own payday. Cut the rigging and the payday just sits there, waiting for you to come and take it. Here's the honest part, the thing this channel exists to say out loud. Most of what we can prove about firing high to disable comes from the records of navies, not pirates. Naval logs, gunnery manuals, and battle reports survive by the ton. Detailed, blow-by-blow accounts of a pirate crew methodically dismasting a merchantman are far rarer, partly because a great many prizes surrendered without a shot fired. And that whole story, the flags and the fear and the long chase, belongs to another video. What we can say with real confidence is this: pirate crews used the same guns and the same specialized shot the navies used, and inventories of captured pirate vessels bear that out. Their own goal of a whole, floating prize gave them every reason on Earth to aim high rather than low. And the surviving accounts of pirate fights that did turn violent describe exactly this pattern. Rigging shredded, decks swept, hulls left sound enough to sail away under a new crew. The engineering fits the evidence, even where the evidence is thinner than we'd like. So, the prize is crippled. Her sails hang in rags, she's lost her way through the water, and she's slewing helplessly in the swell. Now comes the part that actually wins the ship, and it's a problem of timing and nerve more than firepower. The attacker has to close the last stretch of open water and lay his ship physically alongside the target, hull to hull. And that final approach is the most dangerous moment of the whole operation, for the pirates as much as their victims. Because a merchant crew that has decided to fight is not helpless just because their ship has stopped moving. They still have muskets. They may have small cannon of their own, and swivel guns, those little man-killing pieces mounted on the rail that could be loaded with a fistful of musket balls or grape shot and swept along a crowded deck to murderous effect. As the two hulls draw together, the narrow gap between them turns into a killing zone. This is where one of the most stubborn myths falls apart, and Bennerson Little is sharp about it. In the movies, the ships bump together and a wave of pirates leaps from the rail, swinging across on ropes with cutlasses in their teeth. In reality, Little points out, boarders standing exposed on the gunwales as the ships came alongside would have been cut to pieces, shredded by musket fire, by swivel guns, and by cannon loaded with small shot at point-blank range. No competent attacker crossed until that threat had been beaten flat. So before anyone tried to cross, the deck of the prize had to be swept clear. That meant a storm of close-range small arms fire. The flintlock pistol favored aboard ship because it was far less likely than an old matchlock to set off loose powder in all that chaos. The heavier musket, for its reach, and the short, brutal blunderbuss that Little identifies as the most effective shipboard firearm of the age, a stubby gun that threw a spray of shot and turned a companionway or a crowded rail into a slaughter pen. The attacker's own swivel guns raked the enemy deck in return. Marksmen picked specific targets, the men at the wheel, the officers trying to organize a defense, and the enemy's own sharpshooters, perched up in the rigging, who had to be shot down out of the tops before they could pick off the boarding party from above. Some accounts even describe attackers working to jam or disable the target's rudder in these last moments, killing the final scrap of steering she had left, so that not even a lucky gust of wind could carry her clear. Only when that fire had done its work did the ships come to what sailors called pistol shot, and then closer still, until they lay yardarm to yardarm, the ends of their spars nearly overlapping. And at that range, the raid stopped being about cannon at all and became about rope and iron. Getting there in the first place took real seamanship. The attacker had to match the wounded ship's drift, edge in from the side the wind allowed, and bleed off his own speed at the last second so the two hulls came together with a shove instead of a wreck. Come in too hard, and you stove in your own bow, or theirs, and put a hole in the very prize you were trying to save. So even the final approach was a kind of controlled collision, judged by eye on a live moving sea, with men already crouched at the rail, hooks in hand. Now you have two heavy wooden hulls, each weighing hundreds of tons, wallowing side by side in a moving sea, and they will not stay together on their own. The swell wants to grind them and then shove them apart. Let them drift even a few feet, and the whole assault drops into the water between them. So the pirates have to lock the two ships into a single fighting platform, fast, and they do it with some of the oldest tools in naval warfare: grappling hooks and grapnels. A grapnel is a compact iron anchor with several curved claws, tied to a stout rope. A boarding hook works on the same idea, a heavy, multi-pronged hook meant to catch and hold under a hard pull. Men on the attacking ship hurled these across the gap, aiming to snag the enemy's rail, her rigging, her rings and cleats, anything that would bite and take a load. Once a hook caught, the crew hauled on the line hand over hand, dragging the two hulls together until they kissed, and then grinding them tight so the sea couldn't pry them apart. It is exactly the same principle a grappling hook has served since the Romans first used one to catch an enemy's rigging and reel a ship in to be boarded. Nothing about it was subtle. It was heavy, ugly, physical work, done in the open under fire. And the defenders understood exactly what those lines meant. A ship's crew watching iron hooks bite into their rail knew that every rope hauled tight was another few seconds closer to a deck full of armed men. So they fought the ropes. They rushed the rail with cutlasses and boarding axes, that overlooked, brutally useful tool that could hack through a grapnel line, smash a bulkhead, or split a skull with equal ease, and they tried to cut themselves free before the hulls locked. This is why the pirates could not stop shooting. Fire had to be kept on that rail the entire time, pinning the defenders down and dropping anyone who reached for the lines, or the whole bind would be cut away, and the two ships would drift apart with the job half done and the boarders caught in the open. Some crews had rigged another obstacle before the fight ever started: boarding nets. Heavy rope mesh raised from the masts so it hung down and encircled the whole deck, meant to tangle and trap anyone trying to climb aboard. Once that net was up, an attacker couldn't reach the deck without first cutting through it, and every second he spent sawing at heavy rope was a second he hung there exposed, in easy reach of the defenders' pistols and blades. So the pirates came prepared for it, with those same axes and long knives, carving gaps in the netting, even as they crossed. And cross they did, not by leaping heroically through the air, but over gangplanks and boarding bridges thrown across the narrow gap, or straight over the locked rails where the two hulls ground together, using the enemy's own rigging as handholds. There was even a right place and a wrong place to come aboard. Boarding into the waist, the low middle of the ship, meant walking into crossfire from raised decks at both the bow and the stern. So attackers favored the ends, the head or the stern, where a ship was weakest and a foothold was easier to hold. The romantic image is one graceful swing across open air. What it actually took was a scramble across a heaving, smoke-choked few feet of gap, hacking through rope, into the teeth of whatever defense was left. And then the pirates were aboard, and the last phase began. This was the part that decided everything, and it was usually the shortest. The men who did this well didn't fight fair, and they didn't line up for single combat in the middle of the deck. They came across in a mass, and they came loud. Many crews threw grenades first, hollow iron or glass shells packed with powder and fitted with a crude fuse, lit and hurled onto the enemy deck to burst in a spray of fragments and smoke, scattering and stunning the defenders in the instant before contact. Some threw firebombs on top of that. Then the wave came. Pirate crews tended to carry far more fighting men than an ordinary merchant ship, sometimes several times as many, and that raw weight of numbers was itself a weapon. The whole idea was to overwhelm, to flood the deck faster than the crew could organize a line, and to seize the places that actually controlled the ship, the helm, the hatches leading below, the ship's own guns, and above all the officers. Because a crew whose captain is dead or taken usually loses the will to keep fighting. It was fast, it was close, and it was ugly. Men fought with pistols that fired once and then became clubs, with cutlasses, boarding axes, knives, and anything else that could make another man let go of the deck. There was no fair contest in any of it. The goal was to break the defenders' will and control the key points before they could rally. And often the hardest fighting came when a merchant crew refused to give up the open deck and instead fell back below, barricading themselves behind heavy bulkheads and locked hatches in what sailors called closed quarters, forcing the attackers to dig them out compartment by compartment in the dark. But that grim endgame, the fight for the guts of the ship, is a story all its own. Even fire was rationed by the same cold logic. Crews could heat shot red hot in a galley furnace to set an enemy ablaze, and they carried firebombs and incendiary grenades. But fire is the one weapon that doesn't stop when you want it to. Burn a ship to force a surrender, and you risk burning the prize right down to the waterline, cargo and all, along with any chance of ever sailing her home. So against a vessel, a crew actually meant to keep, the incendiaries mostly stayed in the locker. You don't set light to the thing you came to steal. Step back and look at the sequence as a whole, because the design is the point. Cripple the mobility with high shot, beat down the deck with small arms, lock the hulls with hooks and lines, rush the deck with numbers and seize the controls. Every single stage is engineered around one constraint that never changes. The ship has to survive. Every part of that sequence exists to stop her, to hold her, and to take her, and to do all of it while keeping her hull sound and her hold full. Which brings us to the question underneath the whole thing. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just blow a hole in her and scoop up whatever floats? Because the ship herself was very often the greatest prize of all. Yes, the cargo mattered, the sugar and coin and cloth in her hold. But a captured hull could be stripped for gear, sold in a friendly port, or repurposed and sailed away as a working vessel worth more than a season of ordinary plunder. And the best of them became something more. They became the pirates' own ship. When a capture went well and the pirates wanted the vessel, they would put a prize crew aboard, a handful of their own men to work her, and take her along to be sold or kept. A sound ship with her rigging whole could be worth more than everything in her hold, and unlike a cargo of sugar or hides, she didn't spoil. Every hole punched below her waterline, every mast smashed flat across her deck, was money taken straight back off that price. The care a crew took during the fight was, in the plainest possible terms, about protecting the resale. The clearest example in the whole era is the most famous pirate flagship ever to sail. In 1717, Edward Teach, the man the world remembers as Blackbeard, took a large French vessel called La Concorde near the island of Martinique. And here the record refuses to be tidied up, because La Concorde was a slave ship, crossing the Atlantic with hundreds of enslaved Africans chained below her deck, and Teach and his men sold those human beings as part of the plunder. This channel does not sand the edges off that, but it was the vessel itself that Teach prized most. Instead of stripping her and moving on, he kept her. He mounted extra cannon until she carried around 40 guns, renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge, and turned a captured merchantman into one of the most feared warships in the Atlantic. When that ship ran aground and sank off North Carolina in 1718, she was lost for nearly 3 centuries, until archaeologists located the wreck in 1996 and began lifting Blackbeard's guns up out of the sand. The most iconic pirate ship in history was a prize, taken whole, exactly the way we've been describing. And Blackbeard was not unusual in this. Bartholomew Roberts, the Welsh captain remembered as Blackbeard, ran through a whole series of flagships across his career, each one a captured ship pressed into service, and he gave the best of them the same name every time, the Royal Fortune. Roberts is credited with taking hundreds of vessels, more than almost any pirate of the age. And the reason we know as much as we do about men like him traces back to a single book, Charles Johnson's General History of the Pirates, published in 1724, the source that shaped nearly everything the public thinks it knows about these crews. Again and again in those pages, the pattern holds. The ship itself was the prize the whole hunt was for. So what about the image we started with? The pirate blasting his enemy into matchwood. Here's the honest verdict. Pirates absolutely did sink ships. Roberts himself sent a great many to the bottom, but sinking was almost never how they took a prize. It was what happened afterward, once a vessel had been emptied of everything worth having, or when a crew wanted to destroy evidence, or punish resistance, or simply deny a ship back to the owners who'd hunt them for it. Sinking came at the very end, a decision a crew made once a ship had nothing left to give. Blasting a ship to splinters in order to take her would have been like burning down a house to steal the furniture. The men who mastered this understood something the movies always miss. For a working pirate, the cannon was almost the least of it. The real craft was in how little he had to break to walk away with everything. That's the mechanics of taking a ship whole. It was a controlled sequence with a wooden prize sitting at the center of it, and every step was bent toward bringing that prize home in one piece. So here's the question I want you to argue in the comments, and it's a real one that a pirate gun captain actually faced. You've got one loaded broadside and a target closing fast. Do you spend it high, into the rigging, to make sure the ship can't run and you keep her whole and worth having? Or do you spend it low and level, across the deck, to break the crew's will faster and lose fewer of your own men in the boarding, even at the risk of doing damage you can't undo? There's a real case for both. Make your case below. I read them. And if that close-quarters fight caught your attention, the moment a merchant crew slams the hatches and dares the pirates to come down into the dark after them, that's exactly where we're headed next, into the brutal, blind, close-packed battle for the space below deck, where taking a ship whole got a great deal bloodier than anyone planned. Subscribe so you don't miss it.